Hello everybody and welcome to a video about Dwarf Fortress and frame rate. In this video I'm going to be talking about a few ways to optimize your frame rate if you are running on a lower powered PC. Personally, in my experience, I feel that frame rate death isn't something that really happens anymore, at least to a degree. Of course, one can cause frame rate death to happen, but it's mostly mitigatable from the player's point of view. In this video I'm going to be covering several different methods that I just use on habit to automatically increase your frame rate, as well as some methods for increasing frame rate on lower power computers. We're going to be generating a world really quick, and I'm going to be doing a real fast embark and just showing you a few basic start methods that you can have at the beginnings of a fortress to improve frame rate. And then I will be jumping into a larger fortress and explaining a few ways that I keep my main running forts frame rates down a little bit. This isn't going to be a super long video, and it's not going to go crazy in depth on things, but what I'm going to do is hopefully just give you a couple techniques that maybe if you're having some frame rate problems in a current running fortress, you can improve the frame rate there. And also, theoretically, if you're starting a new fortress and you've had problems in the past, you could have a better experience going forward. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about here is world size. So when you generate a brand new world, if you are running on a lower power computer, consider generating a smaller world. Now, what this means is whenever the game is constantly processing stuff in the background. As you are playing the game is kind of thinking about what's going on in the rest of the world. It's not processing every individual dwarf in their location or anything insane like that, but it is doing a lot of behind-the-scenes math, keeping track of population counts, locations of enemies, and locations of armies, locations of groups, and different things that are happening on the world that you will never see as the player unless you then go specifically looking for it. So if you're on a lower power PC, I highly recommend running a smaller world, either small, smaller, or even pocket-sized world. The large world, for comparison's sake, is about the size of New Zealand, if not a bit bigger if you get a lot of landmass, whereas these smaller worlds are more the size of your average video game map. And because we don't currently have adventure mode in the game, there's no real reason, unless you're a crazy person like myself, to generate large worlds, or unless you just like looking at a bigger map. Generally, if you're running what you would consider to be a computer that's maybe 10 years old or 15 years old, or even made in the last 8 years but was much more of a budget PC with a much smaller CPU or a smaller laptop, definitely consider running a smaller world. Now, I see some people talking about frame rate in relation to years. The age of the world, yes, can impact frame rate, but keep in mind, mostly what that impacts is the speed at which the game saves, and not so much the speed at which the game runs. So in my experience, I've had absolutely no frame rate difference between a 1500-year-old world and a 5-year-old world while in game. However, the difference at the speed at which the game can save is the difference between a couple of seconds and upwards of 2 minutes. So just keep that in mind if you're okay with longer save times when the game is doing its auto-saving or when you're saving and loading. Keep in mind that if you're okay with longer save times, that's not going to impact too much the speed at which your game runs. That being said, more visitors may show up if the world is older, and visitors definitely can impact your frame rate. So we're going to generate a 100-year-old smaller world, and once that's done, I will continue talking. So now that the world is loaded up and we're settled to embark in fortress mode, something that I would like to mention is map size. So once again, if you are playing on a smaller PC or an older PC perhaps, when you click on this embark button, it gives you this little flat square. Now it's very tempting to just crank this all the way up to 6x6 and make an absolutely massive embark site. Also keep in mind, in the options menu, you can actually turn this up to 16x16 if you want to go fully crazy. But this is really tempting to crank up and make this size of your map really, really large. So, which is why the topic of this is map size, like embark size. If you want a fortress that runs better, more consistently, for longer, make your map embark smaller. So go down to 3x3, or maybe even 2x2. Maybe you're on a really, really small laptop. Crank it down to 1x1. And using a few settings, you can actually have a fully dwarfy experience with these small maps than you would with a large map. The main concern is like, oh, well, I'm going to have too many dwarves and that's going to overpopulate the area. And it's like, well, think about it this way, right? In Dwarf Fortress, you're not just settling on a 1x1 tile map like in Minecraft. You're settling, or like in SimCity, you're settling on a 250 map tall tower that you can tunnel down in. So if you are settling in a smaller map, if anything, it forces you to play more vertically and can definitely positively increase your frame rate while also giving you like just as much freedom to play. Something else that I think is worth noting though, if you do decide to increase the size of the map, the issues that I've had are not constant frame rate issues. The issues that I've had are when creatures decide to wander onto the sides of the map, I can get some definite hitching where the game just locks and then continues. I only notice this when I make the maps bigger. Don't notice this when I make the maps smaller. As for general frame rate, just having more things going on each map will slow the game down. So keep that in mind. So we're just going to quickly embark here, and then I'll continue talking. So the next thing I would like to talk about now that we've embarked on this lovely little map here, as you can see, it's still a very sizable play area, even though it may appear to be significantly smaller than some maps, this is still a massive space to play in. But the next thing that I would like to talk about are game settings. So there's a few things that I think are worth noting in your settings menu that can also increase frame rate. If you're encountering a massive frame slowdown and you have a big siege attack and you've constructed a lot on the surface, this next one is very, very notable. And what it is weather. So weather in Dwarf Fortress is constantly being processed. Water falls from the sky, temperatures go up and down, the sun comes out and goes away, clouds come over. If you disable weather, specifically on the Fortress of Rope Gorges, which I did on my community spotlight a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of days ago, if time has no meaning, Rope Gorges was a very large surface fortress, which ran at about 30 to 25 frames a second on my computer. When I turned off weather, it jumped up by 15 frames, which is kind of massive, because every single object is constantly being contaminated by water on the constant rainfall of that map, and just simply disabling the processing of weather and water falling from the sky was a massive boost. Now keep in mind, this isn't going to break your game. You're still going to get dwarves thinking about rain, but you won't have the CPU processing power of literal water, like, contaminating the existence of every single thing you've built on the map. So keep that in mind. The next one here is Tempature. Now, Tempature can break some fire-based enemies. So maybe if a creature that's made of fire shows up on your map, you might want to turn this back on. But disabling Tempature, especially if you're doing a lot of things close to lava or in a volcano fortress, every single item that every single character is wearing and is scattered around the map is being processed for its temperature. It's getting temperature checks run over it. So if you get attacked by an army of, let's say, 50 goblins, and each of them are wearing 12 items and holding a spear and a shield, every single one of those items on every single one of those goblins is now suddenly being tracked for its temperature. So if you have a lot of entities on the map, or alternatively, if you're doing a lot of things with weird things that'll be hot and cold all the time, you might want to disable Tempature. This, again, won't break your playthrough. You'll still get ice in the winter. You'll still get you'll still be able to do fun stuff with lava. It's just simply removing Tempature from items on everything in the map. So that is another big one, and it's been a long time frame rate saver for people who play this game a lot. I almost never turn it off personally because I actually don't mind if the game slows down to 30 frames a second or 25 frames a second in some cases. I usually just want to find the other thing that's causing the problem. Another thing that just kind of goes without saying is doors. So if you've built a lot of doors in your map, and let's just say you have all of these areas down here, and they are digging around, and you have doors in these spots, and they're running through, and they're interconnected. Let's say you lock this door. You may have a character that goes thunk, bumps into it, and goes, I want to keep going through that door. But they can't go through that door. But they want to go through that door. And there was a mechanic that was changed in this version 5.0, where you previously could have a door that was tightly closed or a door that was locked. And tightly closed basically stopped animals from walking through, but dwarves could still walk through. And this was removed as a frame rate saving measure. I feel that while it has been removed, locked doors can still sometimes screw with frames for some reason. So be careful about locking doors, and if you suddenly have a large drop, maybe look around and see if you have something stuck behind a door. The next thing I want to talk about now, just in Fortress planning side of things, is stairs. I see a lot of people doing stairs in this kind of pattern of 2x2, and I see a lot of people doing 4x4, and I sometimes see people going crazy with it and doing these. Don't do this. It's that simple. Now, the reason for this is if a dwarf is moving up and down in this stair, or any character for that matter, they're constantly pathing. They're constantly thinking about what direction do I need to go that's optimal. And they want to path around other characters that are going up and down the stairs, which is also an issue for single stair cases like this. If you are pathing in a lot of different directions and there's other characters and traffic on the stairs, they have to lie down in order to go underneath the character that is coming down the stairs. This tile set does not display this very clearly. So a way to avoid this is by simply giving them the most possible directions with the minimum possible options. So mathematically, I'm an idiot, but this I think is 29 possible directions they could have, and this is exponentially higher to get around characters that are coming down the stairs because they still want to take the optimal pathway. What I would recommend doing is building something like this. So if we go to the stairs tool, we can build a little cross pattern. Or if you want to go full chaotic evil, you could build a circle pattern. Now, these two options on the top allow the dwarves to path around each other with the minimum possible options of directions they can go. I personally really like the cross pattern as it doesn't, it's nice and symmetrical, and it works really well with a lot of my building designs, as well as you can smooth and engrave these center tiles. Same with this pattern. Another option that I see a lot of people talking about is ramps. So instead of building stairwells, they will just simply on each layer carve up. Well, in this one, it's an up ramp, and then they'll carve a down ramp next to it, and then 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 a down ramp next to it. These are both completely valid options as stair alternatives that are significantly more efficient for frame rate when you have a lot of traffic on them than the blocks. Now, another thing I would like to show you before we jump over to a larger fortress is population caps. Now, if you look at this fortress, you can see that we have several different options here, a range from 0 to 5,000. Now, these are your population caps. If you have a smaller PC, it is wise to lower this. So by default, Dwarf Fortress will allow you to have up to 200 dwarves in a fort. Now, if you're okay with playing the game in PowerPoint presentation mode, it's totally fine to turn this number up, but I almost never do. There was one fortress a couple of years ago where I set the population cap to 300. We never quite made it there, but I think we got to about 280. And let's just say the game ran in about 15 frames a second on my computer, which was fine for what I was trying to do, but not what a lot of people would accept as legitimate. So if you really want to have better frame rates on a smaller PC, I would recommend setting this to like 75 or maybe even 50. And then down here is your strict population cap. Now, the strict population cap is for births and babies. So you can go actually over top of the population cap if your dwarves are having children. So you could lower this as well. So you could have a hard population cap of 75 and a soft population cap of 100 and still have a perfectly normally functioning fortress. And then, of course, there's the maximum number of babies you can have, and then there's maximum number of invaders. Enemy invasion caps can be found underneath custom settings underneath difficulty. Now, there's a bunch of different things here. You can see enemy population triggers. If you've turned your population down, let's just say that you've cut it down in half, you might want to cut these numbers in half, just so that you can have the same kind of invasion difficulty scaling as you would in normal Dwarf Fortress, minus the, having to have, 100 and something dwarves in order to get your actual difficulty invasions here. Now, if we scroll down a little bit, we can see, various other details here that are pretty spoilerific, but there's one here that I specifically want to look at here, which is enemy population triggers here, which if you cut these in half, if you've increased the number or decreased the number of dwarves you can have in your fortress, you may want to cut these in half, because in order to get the biggest possible sieges, by default, you need 140 dwarves. So if you perhaps would like to have bigger sieges, but maybe you only have a maximum of 100 dwarves, you might, for example, want to turn this down to 90, or a number that more fits with the amount of dwarves that you're going to have. I do have a bug with this menu for some reason where it won't just let me type in and press enter, and I have to click these buttons manually, so keep that in mind. But if you scroll a little bit further down in this screen here, invasion cap for monsters, and then invasion cap regulars. So invasion cap regulars attack 2, the second attack can be at maximum 60, and then invasion cap 3, and max attack size can be 120. If you've turned down the number of dwarves you have and you want the same balancing for normal difficulty, I would recommend turning this up. Hard difficulty increases the numbers of these a little bit, and for me personally, I'm probably going to double these at some point. I don't care if the game runs slowly when I'm under attack. After all, what I do care about is having big fun attacks to fight with. So this is something that is also worth noting. If you've turned down your population cap, you may want to also tweak the amount of dwarves you need in order for things to attack you, and you may also want to lower the amount of things that actually attack you. This is, of course, only if you're running into major frame rate problems during sieges. Simply turn down the number of things that can attack you. This is the Fortress of Deep Orb. It is a rather large fortress that I've been consistently keeping at a usable frame rate of about 50 to 45. And the main way that I've been keeping this fortress running well is garbage disposal. This is a tip that I actually don't see a lot of people using. This is my way of getting rid of garbage, but there's many different ways of getting rid of garbage. And essentially the way it works is right here we have this lava over top of the magma sea. This is kind of overkill. I also have a tutorial on using atom smashers if you would like to use a drawbridge as similar technique, but just slightly different execution. So we have these two stockpiles here, one for refuse and one for corpses and refuse. And essentially the way it works is every so often I simply go to this spot and I designate this stuff to be dumped, and then the dwarves run up here, and if I hit Z on the keyboard, you can see that we have a little garbage dump zone right here. And this garbage dump zone, starting on one tile, going one tile over, the dwarves walk onto the first tile and toss it into the second tile, because they have to be in the zone in order to actually dump stuff. So they toss it over to the right here, and it falls down into the lava, being destroyed and wiped off the map. You could also use a drawbridge for this technique. Now, something else that's worth noting is if you go to the stock screen, and as you can see, the game actually takes a while to load the stock screen because I have a very large amount of stuff actually in this fortress. So while we wait for the game to load the stock screen, I would like to note that what we're going to be doing is I'm going to show you how to mass designate items that you don't want in your fortress. So one of these items that you really don't want to be lying around too much is destroyed clothing. So if you hit X and type in X, and we go to, let's just say, legwear. You see these clothes that have the X's on either side? Well, those are damaged clothing. Granted, this will automatically filter out all ibex leathers, so just keep an eye out for that. But if we go to headwear, same thing. If we go to basically any item that could theoretically have damaged items in, it will give us a list. Now, keep in mind, not all of these will automatically fall in, like puzzle boxes as an example. But if we want to get rid of an item en masse, now they'll just go through all of those into lava. And this goes for almost anything. Keep in mind as well, while you're playing Dwarf Fortress, if you have certain items in large quantities, remember what I said about frame rate and temperature? This is all going to apply here. So if you have large amounts of items with weird temperatures, that will impact your frame rate. So you have two options. You can either disable temperature, like I mentioned earlier in the video, or you can dispose of extra items. This can be done either via simply throwing it into a lava pit. If they're high quality items, it might upset your dwarves, so it's better served by mass trading. And you can use similar search techniques to mass trade off damaged items, or alternatively, just simply getting rid of things that you don't need. Because this fortress is starting to get pretty items heavy, and we're going to need to remove it. Remember those stairs from earlier that I mentioned? Well, they're right in the middle. Thank you very much for watching this video. If it was helpful to you, I hope that you will give this channel a subscription if you haven't already. I have a lot of Dwarf Fortress tutorials where I help people learn the game, as well as I stream on Twitch full-time, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, with optional weekend streams on Saturdays and Sundays. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you once again in the next one.